Ladies and gentlemen, it is now time for the Elder Law Hour with Emily Hicks.
Welcome to the Elder Law Hour, where we offer insights and solutions for today's seniors so you can age with confidence. My name is Brittany Darling, and I will be your guest host today. Grief is a tough topic, and if you're listening today, chances are you have gone through some type of grief. Whether it was a loved one that passed away or your life took an abrupt turn in the seemingly wrong direction, we're talking with Rachel Weinstein about practical ways to move through grief. We'll also touch on caregivers and the grief of a loved one's diagnosis. Diseases like Alzheimer's and dementia in general take our friends and family away months or even years before they actually pass away. We'll talk about why relief and grief can go hand in hand. But first, we're going to dive into some of the intense emotions associated with grief, like anger, guilt, and even regret. When we come back, we will get into it. Welcome back. I'm here with Rachel Weinstein, owner of Jacksonville Center for Grief and Loss. Welcome, Rachel.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
We had Rachel on the show a few weeks ago and had a terrific discussion about moving through grief and why grief is not the problem. If you'd like to go back and listen to that episode, please go to elderlawhour.com and look for episode 32. Rachel, thank you so much for being here. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got where you are today? Why did you choose this industry?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I trained to be a traditional therapist. I got my master's in counseling psychology and was working as a traditional therapist in the state of Pennsylvania. I was young, I was in my late 20s, and I had a partner who died suddenly. And in my own grief, in trying to find support for myself in the community of therapists that I knew about, I realized just how let me just say that therapists do what they do so well, but grief support and traditional therapy, I came to learn, were really different. And when I tried to find support for my grief from therapists, I just wasn't getting what I needed. I didn't know exactly what I needed, but I knew that it
Yeah.
wasn't going back to my childhood or medication, or I knew what it wasn't. And
Mhm.
so I just came up feeling so short from that I vowed to myself that if I somehow ever got through it, I would try to be part of the solution. And I did. About a year later, after my loss, I did find my way to grief support by grief experts. They weren't traditional therapists, but they were specialists in grief. And it was such a wonderful, powerful experience that it just changed the trajectory of my career. And I decided, after I worked through my own loss and went back and did some special training to support grief, so it wasn't just based on my own loss, um, I have devoted the rest of my career to it. So I've been
Yeah.
doing grief support for over 25 years now, and only grief support versus other kinds of issues that I used to take on as a traditional therapist.
Yeah. So the loss of a loved one is probably what everyone thinks about when they think of grief support.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
let's talk about maybe some other reasons why someone would visit a grief support specialist like yourself.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. Okay, well, it's a great question. Grief in and of itself is not only about death and dying. When we talk about bereavement, that's typically related to a physical death, but grief is much more broad, and it speaks to the loss or a change in anything or in anyone that's been important to you, that you've cared about
mm,
deeply, that you've been invested in. So if
yeah.
something or someone, and I'll give examples, if you experience a loss or a change in something or in someone important to you, then you will be grieving. And so it could be the loss of youth. Your mobility is changing. You're starting to look different as you age. You're in a state of grief over what was and trying to embrace what is, right?
Mm,
This is
yeah.
basically what we all go through in grief, and as a very general rule, trying to move beyond what we've known and into a new normal, a new experience. And so it could be a loss of a job. You could be retired and trying to find your purpose and grieving the identity that you had in your role in your professional life. So now who am I without this job, without this role, without this title? What is my purpose in life? What is next for me? It could
Yeah.
be something like a fractured relationship, either a breakup or a family fractured relationship within family. So many things encompass grief and loss. It could also be a loss or change in your health, in someone else's health. A diagnosis will bring on grief, whether it's your own diagnosis or someone else's. You start the grief process as soon as you get news of that
Mm,
diagnosis,
for sure.
particularly if if it's life altering in any way, but particularly if it's a critical diagnosis that could and is expected to shorten your life.
And with all of the diseases that we're seeing now that affect
Mm-hmm.
your brain and your memory and
Mm-hmm.
your function and your
Absolutely.
physical, it's all of those things. And,
Yes,
I can only imagine the grief that comes with a diagnosis like that.
that's right. And it changes the entire structure and relationship within the family when there
Yeah.
is a diagnosis or a change or a loss. The entire network of family and relationships, friends, coworkers, it changes.
Yeah.
And
You
that's
know,
something to grieve. Yeah.
yeah, in my personal experience, we moved to the Jacksonville area 6 years ago,
Mm.
and I can honestly say that I was I was likely grieving for about 6 months to a year.
There's no question that you were. A move is the loss of an old community and a network, a home. When I have people come to me, when people come to me and they talk about what they imagine is their singular grief, and they lead me through where they've been. Well, I moved here in this year, and then and I kind of get into it. I typically uncover multiple losses and changes. So yes, you were absolutely grieving when you moved here. Even, it's interesting that you bring that up because even good changes will inspire the grief process. For example, getting married, moving into a new home, having a
Yeah.
baby. All of these changes really do shake us up and put our equilibrium off, or put us off of
Yeah.
our equilibrium is off. And yes, it's not the same exact kind of grief that one would experience when you're dealing with the death. But like I said, grief and bereavement are very different. And so grief is much more broad and can be unsettling and something to that you deserve to get some support around, to normalize the experience for you, to give you some information, some insight into why you might be feeling like you do, and some coping strategies. These are things that grief experts will support you with.
Yeah. Yeah, I honestly felt like I was in this fog
Mm-hmm.
for a
Yes.
period of time. I almost got in an accident because I didn't
Mm-hmm.
look and I was changing lanes, and then
Yes.
I remember just losing it on driving north on A1A one day because I was just in a
Oh
fog,
gosh.
and, I just didn't know, I missed my friends and I missed my job, and but like you said, it was something good that brought us here. My husband's job changed and it was a promotion for him, and it was good things, but along with good things, you can experience loss of what you had.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it doesn't have to be just one thing or another. It can be good things mixed with difficult experiences alongside those good things. And what you just shared about your experience on the road is what I shared at the last segment that I'll talk about again. Is one of the impacts of grief is intellectual. Our cognitive processes
Mhm.
decrease because we are so consumed with processing our loss and the change that our memory, our attentiveness, our concentration, focus, feeling alert, that all gets compromised. It comes back, but it gets
Yeah.
compromised for a while.
Let's move into bereavement.
Uh-huh.
So let's talk about some of these tough emotions that surround bereavement and
Hmm.
grief, like anger, like guilt, like regret. Why do we all feel so guilty sometimes when this happens in our lives?
It's a really good question. So when we are grieving, particularly the death of a loved one or something really significant, everything's significant, but something that is really hitting us hard. I'm going to take a loss of life as just an example. When we're grieving a loss of another human that we've loved, it is so destabilizing. We feel so incredibly vulnerable and wide open, really exposed, that we don't want to feel as helpless as grief leaves us feeling. We don't want to be with the fact that we actually couldn't prevent what happened.
Yeah.
And so we would much rather either feel responsible or angry. We'd either rather blame ourselves or someone or something else, a healthcare system, the physician, you name it, God, ourselves. We would rather clutch that than to acknowledge that there's so much over which we don't have control. And this is why so many people struggle with guilt and with anger. And there's nothing wrong with either of those experiences. It's part of the grief process. If I have one message today around those two emotions in particular, it's that if you can see it as an actual part of the process of moving through grief, it appears so commonly. You wouldn't believe the places that people will pull responsibility out of it. If only they had done this, or they should have done that. I hear so many stories about, and it's so tempting for me to say, oh, but you couldn't possibly have prevented that. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't argue with them because I know that it's part of the process. I will sit with them and explore that and gently remind them about what we do and don't have control over at the end of the day, because most of us will assign more power to ourselves than we have.
Right.
We think we could prevent something when we didn't actually cause it. We didn't cause it. We couldn't cure it. We couldn't control it. Right. Yet we want to take responsibility for it. So sometimes it's just like a matter of reminding people, you're not as powerful as you're making yourself. You didn't make this happen. You couldn't have. If you could have stopped it, you would have.
Rachel, thank you so much for being here. If any listeners would like to reach out to you for grief counseling, how would they do that?
So they can do a couple of things. First, you can visit my website, which is Jax, J-A-X, grief, G-R-I-E-F as in Frank.com. So pretty easy, jaxgrief.com, or they can call me. The number's on my website. It's area code 669-272-8036. I'm in the Jacksonville area, but I see people both in person and via Zoom, so you don't have to be anywhere near me to have a support session. If you want to move forward with getting set up with grief support, it would be my privilege.
Thank you, Rachel. When we come back, we will tackle regret and why so many of us struggle with this emotion. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Are you approaching retirement or entering a new chapter of life? Now is the time to consider critical decisions that impact your future and the well-being of your loved ones. As you navigate this transition, ensure you've secured your legacy through proper estate planning. Don't fall into the common misconception that you and your spouse can make decisions for each other in times of legal incapacity without a plan in place. Without proper estate planning, you risk a probate judge making decisions for you, which can be costly and cumbersome for your spouse. Protect your assets and ensure they align with your unique circumstances and objectives. Avoid the default state laws that may not reflect your wishes and could lead to unintended consequences, such as disinheriting your spouse or forcing them to litigate your estate. You also may be considering the possibility of a new relationship after the loss of a spouse. It's essential to enter these relationships with clarity, safeguarding your assets and preserving existing family ties. A premarital agreement becomes crucial in these situations, providing legal protection and clarity. When it comes to your children, thoughtful estate planning is key. Protect their inheritance from squandering, divorces, lawsuits, and bankruptcies. Your hard-earned wealth should be a source of security, not vulnerability. Additionally, plan for long-term care, a significant consideration as you enter retirement. Secure a long-term care insurance policy while you still qualify, and explore alternatives that can convert into life insurance if not needed. Statistics show a 70% likelihood of requiring long-term care after the age of 65, making proactive planning essential. Our team can guide you through this process, helping you replace impersonal state-written plans with a tailored approach that safeguards your assets and family. Don't overlook estate planning as you approach retirement. Book a call with us today to secure your future with confidence. Visit emilyhickslaw.com and book a call today. We'd love to help.
Welcome back to Elder Law Hour. My name is Brittany, and I'm your guest host today, filling in for Emily Hicks, your estate law attorney in the greater Jacksonville area. Rachel, thank you so much again for being with us today. Rachel's the owner of Jacksonville Center for Grief and Loss. Let's talk about regret as an emotion tied to grief. Why do so many of us struggle with feeling this after a loss?
Sure. It's a great question, and thank you so much for having me. Regret is so commonly experienced. Anyone going through a loss wants it to not be so, and we try to make some sense of it. And because there's so much in loss that we can't control, the loss itself, the impact that it has on us and others that we love, our family, it's so tempting to want to rewrite history, to want to not experience it. So if only X or Y could have happened, if only I would have done this and not done that, if I would have been able to say this and I didn't get a chance to. All of these things are just a variety of the same expressions of the same basic emotion, which is wanting another experience other than what we've got and trying to find a way within our minds to rewrite history. So we get kind of caught in either the mistake we thought we made, the thing we didn't say, that as though that will have definitively changed the whole trajectory of our experience, or the loss prevented it. So if I would have just left 5 minutes earlier, if I would have, you name it. This experience is so common because, again, I'll kind of give a nod back to what I shared a little earlier, which is that we don't want to be as powerless as we actually are over just the fragility of life, and having an experience remain static. The way it is now is the way we always want it to be. And if we lose it or it changes, of course, we don't want that. And so we're left with this regret and an attempt to rewrite history to make it not so. And in truth, we are powerless over so much. But at the end of the day, there is much that we as human beings cannot control or prevent.
Yeah. What I'm hearing you say is the dialogue that we have in our own minds after we experience a loss, when we're in the midst of grief.
Right.
I think that dialogue is attempting to rewrite our experiences for us. Is that self-preservation, do you think?
It's actually a coping strategy that our brains are naturally kind of trying to go through, that our cognitive process is trying to figure it out. We're trying to solve this problem. And I'm putting problem in quotes because grief in and of itself is not a problem, although our culture would sometimes have us think that it is, that there's something wrong with the way we're grieving. But in truth, these really difficult experiences are all very crafty, clever ways that our brain is trying to make sense of and process the enormity of this loss. Yes, it's really a natural and normal process to go through, whether it's regret or it's anger, it's even guilt. Now, I'm going to say something about guilt. Regret's a little different than guilt because there are, in fact, reasons that why someone might feel guilty. If you, with intent, caused harm, you have cause to feel guilt, right? That can help us move through and recognize where we need to make amends, those kinds of things. But a lot of times people will collapse or they confuse guilt, actual responsibility with just having regrets or maybe
Okay.
feeling responsible, but not being responsible. So I always will
Okay.
explore if someone's saying they feel guilty. I don't dismiss it right away. Let's take a look. Was there something you did intentionally to cause harm? If not, then we're not calling it what it really is. The
Yeah.
guilt doesn't belong to you. You may have wanted the overall experience to be different, but you didn't have a direct hand in purposely and intentionally creating this experience, this loss, this harm.
There are truly a lot of conflicts in families, though. So
Yes.
helping someone work through actual guilt,
Mhm.
that's got to be tough.
It is, but I think that the tools that I use to cope with actual guilt. So, for example, if you're talking about a human relationship and when someone dies, that human relationship is imperfect, right? It's never complete. We never have,
Yes.
we
Yes.
only have perfect relationships with our animals, right? Because that's unconditional love, right? We don't argue with them. We
Yes.
love all the time. But with human beings, it's complicated, right? We argue, we make up, we take for granted, then we treasure. This is the back and forth of just being human. More often than not, when someone dies, there are things that are incomplete. There are things we didn't say, or things we said
Mm,
that were mean. If the natural course of life had been able to continue, we likely would have worked those things through. But when we
yeah.
don't have the chance and we're left with regret, I'll separate like guilt. Guilt would be, okay, did I actually cause this person harm? Did I say something mean intentionally to hurt them the way they hurt me? Maybe I did. And maybe that's something that we need to atone for in our own way because we feel that so deeply now, right? So
Yeah.
that's the way I
Yeah.
use atone. It may be something more significant. Maybe we did. I mean, listen, I've also supported people who did intentionally hurt someone, and there is consequence, there's legal consequence, right?
Yeah.
They did something in anger, they injured them. In some cases, they killed them. And yes, in some cases, if someone's capable of remorse, there is stuff to work through. I'm not a
Yeah.
spiritual leader, but I can guide people toward the ritual of atonement and the place that it has in healing.
I think there's always room for healing.
I think that there must be. We must always prioritize our some people feel like they don't deserve to feel better because if they're suffering, they're somehow honoring their loved one. And I let them know that their love doesn't live in their pain. It lives within their heart, their memory, but it does not live in their pain. So when people, ironically, sometimes when people start to move through their grief and heal a piece of that deep pain, they start to feel guilty. They feel like they're dishonoring their love. They're not grieving the way they should be to honor how much they love and miss their loved one. And that's actually not the
Right.
case. That
Right.
yeah.
That's so good.
Yeah, so
You know,
guilt can even be toward just feeling better. People often feel like they catch themselves in a moment of lightness or peace and they feel guilty about it. When in truth, this is what being alive is. And our love doesn't
yeah.
live in our pain and our misery. It lives in our heart, in our memory, in the legacy that our loved one left behind.
Yeah. This is a great transition to our next topic, Rachel.
Mhm.
I think a lot of caregivers feel this up and down of emotions and talking about how grief can also encompass a sense of relief. And can that relief also lead to guilt?
Oh,
Because
yes.
I've been caregiving for this person, whether it's my spouse, my mother, my son, my daughter, my brother, whoever it is that you're caregiving for, if it's been months or it's been years and it's been a difficult road, there's just this cloud of emotions
Absolutely.
that
Yes.
follow. And
Yes.
let's talk through that just a little bit from this caregiver perspective on
Okay.
this roller coaster of emotions and why it's normal.
Absolutely. Oh, such an important area of dealing with grief. Caregivers have such complex grief. It is incredibly difficult to be a caregiver. And like I mentioned earlier, from the moment your loved one gets diagnosed or even begins to be compromised, even before diagnosis, but when you start to recognize that they aren't the same or they can't move in the same way, but from the moment you recognize that there are significant changes, you begin the grief process. And as a caregiver, to need to continue caring for them alongside that grief in and of itself is a heavy lift. That's
Mhm.
tough to do because you don't have the ability to take care of yourself as much as you need to and deserve to while you're caring for someone else. You're doing a full-time job alone just in caring for someone else. So whatever is left over, you're giving to yourself and feeling guilty about that, probably.
Yeah.
So I'll say that caregivers have an incredibly difficult job, that the grief starts from the moment that they recognize that there is a change. And if they have gotten a diagnosis like dementia, for example, whether it's Alzheimer's or frontal temporal lobe dementia or it's
Mhm.
Parkinson's, and from the moment they get that diagnosis, there's something called anticipatory grief. You're already looking forward to what's ahead and losing them, and you begin grieving from that place. And so one of the things if you fast forward, and I'll come back, but if you fast forward to the end of that person's life, when you've been a caregiver, you have been processing your grief for so long that there is some degree of relief in having an end to the anticipation. It's not that you want to lose the person. It's that, one, you don't want to see your loved one's quality of life compromised any longer than it has been. You don't want to prolong any suffering that they have. You don't want to prolong any suffering that you have just in your experience in watching your loved one suffer the consequences of dementia. You lose people in bits and pieces. When my dad was moving through his dementia, every stage of his dementia was a new bomb going off
Yeah.
emotionally. So the first time my elegant father was incontinent, the first time my father forgot who I was, the first time I saw that he had put something on backward, that you name it, like all of these steps and stages, when he stopped talking, when he stopped remembering my mom, So I think that every step and stage through the process of dementia is in and of itself another grief to
Yeah.
experience, another level of pain. And so, yes, when that ends, of course there's relief. Not relief that the person has died, relief that there's an end to suffering. Who wants to suffer? We don't want it for ourselves. We don't want it for our loved ones. And it's okay to be relieved. It's also natural to have experienced the depth of all of this pain for so long that by the time there is a death, you've moved through a lot of the pieces that someone who has gotten no warning
Mm.
has not gotten a chance to experience. You've moved through that already.
Yeah.
Not that you're done, because there is still grief. It doesn't matter that you've had all of this time. It takes nothing away from your experience after the death in your grief as well. But it is different. It is different than a
Yeah.
sudden and unexpected death.
Yeah. It sounds like others might perceive this as a numbness, perhaps.
Can you say a little more about that?
Yeah, for someone that's been going through this anticipatory grief for years, maybe others may perceive them as being more numb when the passing actually occurs because they've been grieving for years.
Absolutely.
So, maybe you're right. Maybe they have been moving through these different feelings and emotions and they're just
It can be yes, it can present as, but it can also be a very real numbness because it can be, even as
Okay.
much as you expect it, it can be shocking despite the fact that you expected it. Because even though, like, for example, I knew that my dad was going to die and I had advanced knowledge of that. He was in memory care. I knew that at some point within a certain amount of time, he would die. I also knew when they called and said, it's going to be a matter of sometime within the next several hours or so that I
Okay.
went to his bedside. But even that didn't fully and totally prepare me for my own dad dying. I mean, I have one dad. And so
Yeah.
there's no real preparation. You might be able to narrow down, well, the prognosis is X amount of years, or now they have X amount of hours. That's data, but it's not total preparation for our heart and soul to be with
Right.
the enormity of the loss of our loved one, much less some of the things that can happen as someone's dying that can be alarming for some people, whether it's something they saw or heard, or just the sort of random suddenness of, yes, you knew it was going to happen, but then you get this phone call. So
Yeah.
leave room for all of that. Yes, you can still be shocked despite knowing technically that this was going to happen. It should take nothing away from your ability to feel shocked and to even be numb, not just seem numb, but be numb.
Right. Right.
Mm-hmm.
My grandmother is moving through these stages currently,
Mm-hmm.
and when she was at the point where she couldn't cook anymore, I just felt so sad because all of our holidays were her in the kitchen, her
Mm.
hand on her hip, a wooden spoon in her hands, and she's stirring mashed potatoes, and then she's opening the oven and she's checking on the turkey, and she's flipping fried squash over in the cast iron pan. All of these
Ah.
memories are flooding back when that's no longer possible for her.
Mm-hmm.
And I've joked with my husband over the years that I cook just like her. Like my hand is on my
Ah.
hip, just like hers. It's like the opposite way that you would put your hand on your hip. So your forefinger and your thumb,
Uh-huh.
are not on the top, they're on the bottom. So you kind of flip your hand over, and it's a very
Oh, right,
specific
right.
way, to put your hand on your hip when you
Uh-huh.
stir something at the stove. Every time I cook and I put my hand on my hip and I'm going to stir a pot, I think about her.
Ah,
And it's such a sweet memory now,
that is sweet.
because she can't do that anymore.
Mm,
It
it is
makes my
sweet.
heart warm just thinking
Oh,
about her today.
that's lovely.
But
Lovely.
anyway, well, Rachel, we are going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to touch on an acronym that Rachel uses called PIES, PIESS. And we're going to briefly talk about what PIES stands for and then some practical coping mechanisms to help all of us deal with grief. So stick around. We'll be right back.
This is Vicki Oakes, your St. Johns County Supervisor of Elections. The 2024 elections are coming. They will be here soon. Are you election ready? If not, and you need to be, you can visit our website at votesjc.gov. That's votesjc.gov, or contact our office at 904-823-2238. Make sure you are election ready.
Welcome back to the Elder Law Hour. My name is Brittany Darling, and I am your guest host today, filling in for Emily Hicks. And we are here with Rachel Weinstein today, the owner of Jacksonville Center for Grief and Loss. Thank you, Rachel, for being here. You have been such a wonderful guest today, and I just love our conversation. So much good advice, so much knowledge. For this segment, we're going to talk about an acronym called PIES, PIESS. And it is basically going over correct me if I'm wrong, the symptoms of grief.
Actually, it's close. It's going over
Okay.
the impact of grief,
The
all of the
impact of grief.
areas that are impacted as we grieve. So each of the letters stands for a different impact that grief.
Yeah. Okay,
So,
so
yeah.
so let's start with P.
Okay. So this is just an acronym that I created because I found myself talking about these areas for so long that I thought I'm gonna try to shortcut this. So the P in pies, and this is like coconut pies, PIESS. The P stands for all of the physical ways that grief impacts us. So if we start at the top of our head and we go to the bottom of our toes, grief is so much more than an emotional experience. It is not just emotional, it's physical, it's intellectual, that's the I, it's emotional, that's the E, it's social, and it's spiritual, which I'm going to separate from the religious. So going back to where I started, the P stands for physical. And if we went from the top of our head to the bottom of our toes, I will share with you some of the most common physical impacts of grief. Things that, this is not an exhaustive list because it'd be your whole program, but our whole body is impacted when we grieve. So headaches, super common. Dry mouth, really common. And that's because our body's working overtime on processing our grief. It's like we're running a marathon. We're going to be thirstier. Tightness in our throat, which is often related to anxiety. Heaviness in our chest, even pain in our chest. Further down, digestive issues. So feeling nauseated, having an upset stomach, so you're running to the bathroom all the time, or your appetite is way off. You're either not eating at all, you're not hungry at all, or you find yourself very hungry, or maybe kind of flip-flopping between the two. Heaviness in your legs, feeling like when you walk, you're walking with cement boots on. These are just some of the physical symptoms of grief. They're so common that they're the ones that come to mind first. But if you're experiencing anything physical that's never been present before your grief, it's more likely than not related to the stress of your grief. Your body is impacted, not just your emotional self.
Right.
Okay, so that's the P in pies. The I in pies stands for the intellectual. We talked about this a little bit earlier in the interview when you were on the road and you had just moved here and you almost got into an accident, something like that. What happens is it takes all of our energy, the energy in our entire being, to process grief. And so our cognitive process just doesn't have anything to work with. We're busy.
Yeah.
We are busy. The process of grief is so consuming that intellectual capacity will be decreased while we're grieving. That means our memory, our concentration, our focus, our sense of being alert, feeling awake. So we're going to feel foggy. We're going to be forgetful. We're going to not really be able to read much. We might be able to skim through a magazine, but not read a book. Intellectually giving ourselves a break and recognizing that our intellectual capacity is temporarily hijacked in our grief, and giving some workarounds like pay full attention if you must drive, because just know that getting into the car, it's almost like you're getting into the car under the influence.
Yeah.
If you don't have to drive, don't. If there's something you would normally need to remember, write it down. Send a memo to yourself, a text to yourself, an email, whatever it is. Someone gives you verbal instructions, ask for them to send it to you in a text or an email. You have a notepad or notebook that you carry with you, whatever workaround you can have when it comes to your intellectual capacity being compromised in your grief, use it. The emotional part, the E in pies, that's all over the place. Yes, it's sadness. Yes, it might be crying, but there's so much more than that. There's numbness, there's anger, there's guilt, there's regret, there's longing, intense pain. There is feeling lost, vulnerable, anxious. A lot of anxiety goes hand in hand with grief. Feeling even like you're suddenly feeling like sounds are louder to you and you don't want to be in crowds. And those are signs of anxiety and kind of having a nervous system that's raw, that's exposed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So these are all emotional experiences too. Again, a huge list of emotions, but it's so much more than sadness. And just because you're not crying does not mean you're not grieving or you're not feeling the impact emotionally. It can also be unexplained moments of lightness even joy,
Mm.
peacefulness. People don't
Okay.
think about that, but our body actually needs a reprieve, a break from the heaviness. It will make us take a break, even without our permission. Isn't that interesting? So
That
when
is
people
interesting.
have a moment of feeling like suddenly, even if it's very fleeting, like suddenly they feel like they got this. Suddenly they feel like an unexplained moment of peace. When we yawn, it doesn't necessarily mean we're tired. Did you know that? It means that our body needs oxygen. So just like our
Yeah.
body will take a yawn because it needs oxygen, our bodies will also take a break from the heaviness because it needs the break to keep going. So park that inside of you and let yourself know that the next time you feel a moment of lightness, despite that you're grieving, it's nothing to feel guilty about. This is your body getting what it needs.
It's very interesting.
Yeah, it is, right? It's fascinating when I first learned that a long time ago, but I like spreading the word about that now.
Yeah.
One of
Yeah.
the S's in pies that I want to give a nod to next is the social impact of grief. There's this saying that grief rearranges our address book. I may have mentioned
Mhm.
that the last time I was on. It's so true that
Oh,
I think
it's
it
so
bears repeating.
true. It does. You're exactly right. And again, Rachel was on a few weeks ago, and if you want to hear it, that episode is episode 32. So if you go to elderlawhour.com, look for episode 32. She really gets into why grief changes your address book. But say it again, Rachel, because you're right. It
Sure.
is worth repeating.
Right. Grief rearranges our address book because what happens is that the people that we would have thought would be there for us through thick and thin, that may absolutely want to be there for us, they are as unprepared as most people are in our culture to confront our grief in a way that they are comfortable with, right? In a way that has them feeling competent, feeling confident in being able to support us. They don't know what to say because nobody's helped us learn. Isn't it ironic? I know I talked about this the first time. It's ironic that every single one of us will grieve, and yet no one gets any. We go to school, we learn all kinds of things. We learn about drugs, and we learn about sex, and we learn about controlling our behavior and our emotions in class, and dealing with distractions, and teachers are teaching all kinds of things about dealing with our anger. But what about grief? Right? You get lots of lessons in class. They're even teaching kids now some things about meditation in some schools, which is awesome. But when it
Yeah.
comes to loss, every single one of us will grieve, but nobody talks to us about what that's going to be like, how crazy it's going to feel, how sad we're going to be, how angry we might be, how physically we're going to experience some changes. So, because of that, we also don't know how to support other people as they grieve.
Hmm.
Therefore, when you're dealing with your network of friends, family who want to support you, but they don't know how, what do? They typically move away from you because they feel like they're afraid they're going to make it worse. They're afraid going to say something that's going to make you upset or make you cry.
Mm.
So they don't say anything because they don't want to say the wrong thing. I've had people start to text me instead of call me or show up because they're afraid of being live and in person and on the spot and not knowing what to say. So they get a little
Yeah.
distance and they do it from their computer. They post on social media, sorry for your loss, or they send a text thinking of you, praying for you, but they don't
Yeah.
show up. And that can be extremely isolating and infuriating, bewildering, all of the above. The other thing is that it may our pain and grief may remind them of their own fear, their own pain, or their
Yeah.
worry. If we lost our child, they might lose their child, and they can't get too close to that, or our mother or our father or our
Right.
sibling.
Right.
Or maybe they have had a loss and they just can't confront it, and confronting our pain exposes theirs and they can't go there. So it's very isolating. That's the social impact of grief. And what I try to encourage people to do is to spend some quiet time thinking about exactly what would feel supportive to them as specifically as they can. It may be just, for example, I remember in my grief wanting that night times were really hard and I just
Mm,
wanted company. It's not that I wanted
yeah.
somebody to say just this perfect thing to me. What is there to say? But I lived alone and I was so deeply in grief and I was so anxious and so sad that I just
Yeah.
wanted someone to spend the night with me. So something as simple as that, just saying, you know what would help? Can we just do a sleepover? You don't have to be prepared to talk to me about anything. I just need your presence, right? If you can spend some quiet time just thinking about whether it's a gesture like that or it can be, hey, mornings are really tough for me. Can you just call me in the morning when I'm driving to work? And
Mhm.
I don't care if it's about this, anything, just it's really hard for me. Or first thing when I get up in the morning, I'm without my spouse and it's extra hard for me. I have a hard time getting out of bed. Can you just call me? So it could
Yeah.
be something as simple as that. But telling your people who really do want to help you, I'm not talking about the acquaintances that don't really have an investment in our life, but I'm talking about the people that really love and care about you, but they don't know what to do and you're experiencing them moving away from you. Then ask
Yeah.
ask them for something that you actually would feel supported by. Spend a little bit of quiet time thinking about something that's tangible that you could ask them to do. It may be just, can you just hear me? Can you just
Mhm.
sit with me without trying to fix it? That would be a huge gift. Just letting me know that you see me, that you hear me, and that you're not going away. And the last S is the spiritual impact of grief. And the the reason that I say that I'm separating the spiritual from the religious is not everybody is religious or is religious anymore. They may be in a place where they're angry at God, or maybe they never had a relationship that was faith-based. Spiritual speaks more to the big issues and questions that we take on, that we ask ourselves after when we're grieving, like
Yeah.
why? Where are they? Am I being punished? What does life mean now? What is my purpose now? Where are they?
Right.
So big questions about life and meaning, and a lot of things seem extremely small and without purpose in life after loss. Like what matters, right? When you've
Mhm.
lost it, everything pales in comparison. So we go on this sort of existential search for meaning, finding meaning again in life. That's nothing you take on initially. That's something much further down the road, but we start thinking about meaning immediately. What did,
Yeah.
what does our life mean? And what means anything anymore in comparison to how huge this loss is to me?
Yeah.
We grapple with that. That's what I mean about the spiritual impact of grief.
Let's talk about some practical coping mechanisms when you're dealing with, say, a loved one did pass away, and I just am dealing with headaches and
Yeah. Yeah.
those, questions about, I'm sad and I'm at peace and I'm angry and I'm kind of weaving in and out of all these impacts of
Yes.
highs. And so
Yes.
what are some practical things that will help me move through these impacts?
Absolutely. So I can actually use the acronym to talk about some of the coping strategies.
Okay.
For the physical impacts of grief, the headaches, I actually forgot to mention too, crushing fatigue. Even if you can't sleep, you're exhausted, right? Um,
Right.
so really basic things physically, we need to give ourselves. For example, even if sleep is a challenge, resting your body, hydrating with water more than you're used to doing, self-care around nutrition. Even though you may not want to eat, that's okay. You don't have to have 3 square meals a day when you're grieving. But I do encourage people to get some substantive nutrition daily just to give their bodies fuel to get through it. And it may be simple as getting some protein powder, throwing in, your beverage,
Mhm.
your milk of choice, whatever, a banana, some natural peanut butter for some healthy fats, and just give your body some nutrients for energy so that you don't literally weaken, right? And become more
Right.
open to illness, which stress is going to open us up to anyway. So keeping your body rested, hydrated, and having some degree of nutrition every day. Those are really basics, but they're essential. It will make all of those physical impacts in grief a little bit better. The intellectual impact of grief, writing things down. First of all, actually, let me back up before even writing things down. Be easier on yourself about how compromised your concentration, your memory, your focus is, how out of it you feel. Be easier on yourself.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with you. This is an impact of grief that you cannot help. So first, be easier on yourself about it, more patient with yourself and kind toward yourself. And then make it easier on yourself literally by doing what's meaningful to you to jog your memory or to lower even the need to concentrate. Forget about trying to read that book that someone's telling you have to read right now. You're probably not going to be able to. So keep it light. I don't think I read for a solid year in my grief. I think I just looked at magazines and watched sitcoms. And honestly, I couldn't handle intense concentration. So there's that. Intellectually, write notes to yourself or have people email it to you, text it to you, put it on a sticky pad, and lower your expectations. And by the way, you can let other people know they need to lower theirs too of you because they've learned that this is a part of grief.
Right.
The emotional, listen, this is a toughie because there's nothing we can do in terms of a coping strategy to take the emotional impact of grief away, the depth and the degree to which we're hurting, that we may feel intense longing and feeling like we're just going crazy, all of that. What we can do, though, is dedicate some actual concentrated time to lean into the way we're feeling. Time, intentional time to grieve is just as important as intentional time leaning out of it and away from it and finding some light distraction. Both have their place. So grief doesn't need a lot of dedicated time to lean into it, but it needs some. Alongside the dedicated time to just cry or to just yell or to just be with a support person, a friend, a counselor, we also need some dedicated time to give ourselves a break, or to tend to other things that we have to do, children, family, meal preparation, work. I mean, many of us are having to do these things alongside our grief. We can't, unfortunately, stop the entire world while we're grieving as much as we'd want to. So I'm of the belief that living in the real world, we need to honor both places with some intention, even when it comes to, and this sounds a little nuts, but even when it comes to scheduling, like, hey, this is the time that I have that I'm going to completely and utterly give myself over to whatever is coming up for me emotionally.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to promise that to myself at this other time, like maybe it's your morning time, maybe it's your lunchtime. And it doesn't mean you can fully and totally pack up and put away all the emotions. It means that you're with intention, letting yourself have it, and you're doing your best with intention to pay attention to other things that you have going on in your life as well.
Right.
As best you can, right? I'm definitely not implying that it's this nice, neat box that we can pick up and put away. But as best you can, instead of just trying to either stuff it all the time or lean into it all the time, because neither of those really work.
I love the practical ways that we can move through this. Let's quickly give a little strategy or coping with social and spiritual, and then we'll let listeners know how to get in touch with you.
Absolutely. So the social impact of grief and what we can do to honor this impact and cope is, first and foremost, there's a little exercise that I like to do with people. I can describe it on the radio since I can't show it. If you trace your hand, just like when we were kids and we would make a turkey, right? You trace your hand on a piece of paper. Inside each of the fingers that you've traced, I want you to list an emotion that you're really aware of feeling lately in your grief. It might be guilt, the things we've talked about today, inside of your thumb. It might be regret inside of your first finger. It might be anger inside of your middle finger, which is why I'm putting it in the middle. The ring finger might be intense sadness or longing. And the last one might be feeling just numb out of it, right? That's an emotion. That's a presentation too in grief. So I'm just giving examples. Outside of each finger, what was the thumb? Talked about guilt, I think.
I think so.
Yeah. So outside that finger, I want you to list at least one person that you could go to that you know to be supportive when you feel guilty. The next finger, I want you to do the same with whatever that emotion that you listed and name someone different. The reason, and we're going to go down the line with each of the fingers, the reason that this is an important exercise, it's to build a social network. It's to build a support system is what I meant, more than a social network, a support system, because most of us make the mistake of going to one or maybe two people with everything that we feel all the time, when in truth, none of us deal equally well with all emotions, myself included. I'm better with some than others. So it helps us, and ideally you should start to build the number of people attached to each of those fingers. If you're not sure who you can use, find somebody to ask. Hey, I've just done this exercise. I heard this grief expert talking, and I don't know who I can go to when I'm feeling guilty. But when I'm feeling guilty, could I come to you and try it out? Like when I'm feeling guilty, could you be with me, right? So it's just a strategy for building a support system for ourselves. Because most of us give it all to our partner or all to our best friend, and no one person can handle equally well all that we're feeling.
Yeah.
And then the last one, the spiritual one, I would say to do some, first of all, if it's about dealing with big life questions and you find something like a spiritual leaning, like a philosophy to be supportive with you, then you can either read it or listen to it. You know, maybe a podcast, it may be a YouTube video, it may be something with someone who, for example, you can, if you are a person, let's say, of faith, it might be tuning into a program that talks about faith and loss, right? You can find that, I'm sure, at a million channels on YouTube. It could be something more formal, like in the way of organized religion, like going to your church or synagogue. It could be something else like meditation. It could be walking in nature. And that's where I find the most meaning is by the ocean or sitting by a fire and just contemplating, life, and just spending some quiet time being grounded by nature is a way to deal with the spiritual questions that come up that we need some time and some focus to move through, to pay attention to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Rachel. This has been super helpful. If any listeners would like to reach out to you for grief counseling, how would they do that?
So they can do a couple of things. First, you can visit my website, which is Jax, J-A-X, grief, G-R-I-E-F as in Frank.com. So it's pretty easy, jaxgrief.com, or they can call me. The number's on my website. It's area code 669-272-8036. I'm in the Jacksonville area, but I see people both in person and via Zoom, so you don't have to be anywhere near me to have a support session. And I do free consultations, and we can talk about what works for you if you want to move forward with getting set up with grief support. It would be my privilege.
Well, thank you, Rachel. It was a pleasure to have you on Elder Law Hour. And listeners, thank you so much for letting me be your guest host today, for filling in for Emily Hicks. If you would like to know more about Emily and our law practice, please visit emilyhickslaw.com. If you'd like to know more about Elder Law Hour or to see our past episodes, please go to elderlawhour.com and you will see our episodes on the episodes page. And we will see you next week.
Are you ready to invest in real estate without the headaches? Look no further than investjacksonville.com, your trusted partner in turnkey real estate investments. With over 18 years of experience, our process has been fine-tuned, and now we're opening up our team to other people just like you. At investjacksonville.com, we're selective about who we work with because we believe in delivering the best. Our dedicated acquisition team scours the market to find the finest properties, while our skilled construction and maintenance team ensures every detail is taken care of. From new roofs to granite countertops, HVAC systems to plumbing and electrical, we leave no stone unturned to make sure there's no surprises. We're in this together with our investors for the long haul. With our first-year guarantee, we put our money where our mouth is. We guarantee your rental rate for the first year, giving you time to build reserves and budget for any surprises that may come your way later. We believe in our construction team and our tenant placement team, which is why we offer this unbelievable guarantee. We're committed to your success and peace of mind. We're passionate about making it simple and easy, and a no-brainer for others to get started investing, because we know what real estate can do for people to reach financial freedom. So if you're ready to invest with confidence, contact Invest Jacksonville today at 904-536-3000 or visit our website at investjacksonville.com. Let us show you why there's nobody quite like us. investjacksonville.com, your authentic partner in hassle-free real estate investing. Contact us now.
Thank you for tuning in to the Elder Law Hour with Emily Hicks. Join us this and every Saturday for the Elder Law Hour with Emily Hicks.